प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. Okay, so we're going to start with verse 6.33. I'm going to share my screen. If someone is interested, they can recite with me. I mean, can follow along with me. Okay, so let's recite this first. You can repeat after me. Arjuna Vacha.
Arjuna Vacha.
Yo yam yogastvaya prokta.
Yo yam yogastvaya prokta.
Samyena madhusudana.
Samyena madhusudana.
Etasyaham na pashyami.
Etasyaham na pasyami.
Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram.
Chanchalatvat sthitam stiram.
Arjuna Vacha.
Arjuna Vacha.
Yo yam yogastvaya prokta.
Yo yam yogastvaya prokta.
Samyena madhusudana.
Samyena madhusudana.
Etasyaham na pashyami.
Etasyaham na
pasyami.
Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram.
Chanchalatvat sthitam stiram.
Yo yam yogastvaya prokta.
Yo yam
yogastvaya prokta.
Samyena madhusudana.
Samyena madhusudana.
Etasyaham na pashyami.
Etasyaham na pasyami.
Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram.
Chanchalatvat sthitam stiram.
Anyone else would like to recite?
Arjuna Vacha.
Arjuna Vacha.
Yo yam yogastvaya prokta.
Yo yam
yogastvaya
yogastvaya prokta.
prokta.
Samyena madhusudana.
Samyena madhusudana.
Etasyaham na pashyami.
Etasyaham na pashyami.
Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram.
Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram.
Arjuna Vacha.
Arjuna Vacha.
Yo yam yogastvaya prokta.
Yo yam yogastvaya prokta.
Samyena madhusudana.
Samyena madhusudana.
Etasyaham na pashyami.
Etasyaham na pashyami.
Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram.
Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram.
Arjuna Uvacha.
Arjuna Vacha.
Yo yam yogastvaya prokta.
Yo yam yogastvaya prokta.
Samyena madhusudana.
Samyena madhusudana.
Etasyaham na pashyami.
Etasyaham na pashyami.
Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram.
Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram. Okay. Synonyms. Arjuna Vacha.
Arjuna Vacha.
Arjun said,
Arjun said,
Yah
I am
this system,
the system.
yoga,
Yogaha.
mysticism,
Mysticism.
tvaya,
Tvaya.
by you,
By you.
prokta,
Proktaha.
described,
Described.
samyena,
Samyena.
generally,
Generally.
madhusudana,
Madhusudana.
O killer of the demon Madhu,
O killer of the demon Madhu.
etasya,
Etasya.
of this,
Of this.
aham,
Aham.
I,
I.
na,
Na.
do not,
do not,
pashyami,
pashyami,
see,
see,
chanchalatvat,
chanchalatvat,
due to being restless,
due to being restless,
sthitim,
stitim,
situation,
situation,
stiram,
stiram,
stable.
stable.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Arjun said, O Madhusudana, the system of yoga which you have summarized appears impractical and unendurable to me, for the mind is restless and unsteady. Purport. The system of mysticism described by Lord Krishna to Arjuna, beginning with the words Shuchaudeshi and ending with Yogi Paramaha, is here being rejected by Arjuna out of a feeling of inability. It is not possible for an ordinary man to leave home and go to a secluded place in the mountains or jungles to practice yoga in this age of Kali. The present age is characterized by a bitter struggle for a life of short duration. People are not serious about self-realization, even by simple practical means. And what to speak of this difficult yoga system which regulates the mode of living, the manner of sitting, selection of place, and detachment of the mind from material engagements. As a practical man, Arjuna thought it was impossible to follow this system of yoga, even though he was favorably endowed in many ways. He belonged to the royal family and was highly elevated in terms of numerous qualities. He was a great warrior. He had great longevity, and above all, he was the most intimate friend of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 5,000 years ago, Arjuna had much better facilities than we do now, yet he refused to accept this system of yoga. In fact, we do not find any record in history of his practicing it at any time. Therefore, this system must be considered generally impossible in this age of Kali. Of course, it may be possible for some very few rare men, but for the people in general, it is an impossible proposal. If this were so 5,000 years ago, then what of the present day? Those who are imitating this yoga system in different so-called schools and societies, although complacent, are certainly wasting their time. They are completely in ignorance of the desired goal. नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्ण पृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी निति धामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवी गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पश्चात देश तारिणे. Read the translation one more time. Arjuna said, O Madhusudana, the system of yoga which you have summarized appears impractical and unendurable to me, for the mind is restless and unsteady. So we are discussing 6.33, and we see that here in this verse, Arjuna is kind of rejecting the whole process of Ashtanga Yoga that Krishna had explained. So Krishna had taken great trouble to explain this process on a battlefield where a war is about to happen. So if you remember the discussion that goes on this 6th chapter, so there are quite a few, so 32 verses Krishna speaks, and after that Arjuna rejects this. So there is also a significance that acharyas point out about why Arjuna is rejecting at this point, right after Krishna had spoken verse 6.32. Krishna had spoken much more severe verses about controlling the mind and following different regulative principles earlier, but at that time Arjuna did not reject this. But right after Krishna had spoken 6.32, Arjuna interrupted Krishna and then he rejects in a way. And Prabhupada also points it out that Arjuna is rejecting this process of 8-fold yoga system. Prabhupada is pretty heavy in his purport. We'll talk about that also. But if you remember, when Krishna started describing this process of Dhyana Yoga, he first talked about who is a true renunciate. He says that actually a person who is not attached to the fruits of his work, and who is not obligated, he work as he is obligated. He is actually a true renunciate, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. That's how Krishna had put it. And then he also talks about who. So he says that actually he defines the yoga. Now there are different definitions that come about yoga. In the 2nd chapter also Krishna gives a definition. In the 5th chapter Krishna gives and there are a little variations in the definitions, but in general the theme is the same. But here he gives a definition of yoga. He says that to link with the supreme is called yoga, and then he says who is qualified to do yoga. He says that one who has renounced the desire for sense gratification. It's a very important verse. Who can become a yogi? One who has renounced the desire for sense gratification. Only he can become a true yogi. So after defining this, after telling who is a true renunciate and what is yoga, and who can become a yogi, then Krishna speaks further. So he makes it clear in the verses there that he's going to describe now about the Ashtanga Yoga process. And then he talks about the biggest stumbling block on the path to perfection in this line of Ashtanga Yoga is actually the mind. He speaks a very intricate verse. He says, Bandhuratmatmanastasya yenatmevatmana jita anatmanastu shatrutve vartetatmaiva shatruvat. He says that actually one who has conquered the mind, for him the mind is the best of the friends. But for him who has not conquered the mind will remain the greatest enemy. We can say that, okay, I have this enemy, that enemy. But Krishna is saying the greatest enemy is the mind itself if you have not conquered the mind. And further, Krishna says that actually if you have conquered the mind, you have already reached the super soul. So actually the whole idea is, in the Ashtanga Yoga system, the whole idea is to control the mind, subdue the mind, and then make the mind your friend. And once you're able to do that, then actually the Ashtanga Yoga can be successful. So the whole process of Ashtanga Yoga is to deal with the mind and how to deal with the mind. So there, when Krishna starts describing, Prabhupada also points out that, starting from Shuchau Deshe, Prabhupada says, so that verse is 6.11, Shuchau Deshe Pratistapya, Sthiramasanaatmanaha, Natya Ushritam Nati Nicham, Chelajina Kushottaram. Basically, Krishna describes that you have to first go to a purified place, a sacred, secluded place where you go and sit on a particular asana, and then, the asana has to be not very high, not very low. It has to be made of deer skin and sit on it. Then the eyes should be half closed, half open. Then you have to, look at the tip of your nose. You have to concentrate that. So first the consciousness has to be fixed on the nose, and then slowly the consciousness has to be brought inside of, inside us. So that's how he describes the process. Now it's very interesting that Arjuna has not asked this question when all this was being spoken by Krishna. And then actually Krishna, after describing this process, Krishna also says that actually it's not going to work like this. There has to be also some regulation at the material level. Now, although this process is spiritual, but this spiritual process will not work until there is a material regulation. And that he talks about in, I believe, 16-17 verses, where he says, Yukta ahara viharasya, yukta cheshtasya karmasu, yukta swapnava bodhasya, yogo bhavati dukkha. He says actually you have to be yukta in ahar and vihar. So ahar is food, our eating habits, and vihar is entertainment. You have to be regulated in what you are eating. So you should not eat too much, you should not eat too little. There has to be a little bit of entertainment also. And yukta cheshtasya karma. So cheshta is endeavor. You have to be regulated in endeavor. It's not that we don't have to put any endeavor at all. Even for material things, the endeavor has to be done, but it has to be regulated. You have to understand how much endeavor should we actually put for material things and for spiritual things, and karmasu and other activities also, endeavors and activities. And yukta swapnava bodhasya. Swapna is sleeping, and bodhasya is, how much we are, when we are, what time we are waking up, what time we are sleeping. So that has to be regulated. And if that is done, once a yogi is able to do this, then yogo bhavati dukkha. Then he will be able to glide over the material miseries. Okay, so that's how he puts it. And then like this, when he is describing, then he comes to the Samadhi verses of the Gita, of this chapter, the 6th chapter, verses 20 to 23. They describe the Samadhi stage. And these verses, it is considered to be the heart of the 6th chapter. Beautiful verses. Many acharyas, many bhakti yogis have also written commentaries on it, because it also applies to bhakti yoga in a way. So those verses are, it starts with yatra uparamate chittam niruddham yoga sevaya yatra chaivat atmanam pashyan atmani tushchati sukham atyatmit. So that's how he describes that, once a person has attained samadhi, so what happens is yatra uparamate chittam. So in that state, uparamate means it becomes still. What becomes still? Chittam. Chittam is the consciousness becomes completely still. Niruddham, it becomes fixed. And yoga sevaya means by the practice of yoga. Yatra chaivatmatmana pashyanatmani tushyati. In that state, the person is able to perceive himself in the sense the soul is able to perceive itself. It's very, even just to contemplate is also very difficult for us. How can we perceive the soul? I can perceive my nose, my ear, my eyes, my hands, but how do we see the soul inside us? We can't. But this process, if we follow this diligently, then we will be able to. So Krishna actually puts a lot of efforts in describing this process, and he also describes what is the ultimate consequence of performing this and actually succeeding in this process. And Krishna also says that once this the happiness that the person attains in that state, it is atyantikam yattat buddhim grahyam atindriyam. He says actually it is extremely joyful. That state is extremely joyful. It is so joyful that it is atindriyam. Atindriyam means it is beyond the senses. The senses cannot behold that happiness, and it is an experience for buddhi. Buddhi means for intelligence. Only through our intelligence we can perceive that happiness. Excuse me. And Krishna says, Yam labdhva cha param labham manyate nadikam tata. Now, actually, after attaining that state, the yogi thinks that there is nothing more to be achieved. We understand. So this is actually it is explained here that this is the experience of the self. And after perceiving the self, the yogi thinks that there is nothing better to be achieved. But we understand by the commentaries of the acharyas, and intellectually we understand that even beyond that there is some sukha, and that sukha is, so Paramatma sukha is there, and then the enjoyment that we get by associating with Krishna himself. So we understand Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan are the three phases of the absolute truth. So here, even below Brahman is the experience of the self, and above the experience of the self is Brahman realization, then Paramatma realization, and then Bhagwan realization. So how much more, if a person just thinks that just by experiencing the self, the person is so happy, then how much more happy that person would be when he actually is able to associate with Krishna directly. And Krishna also says, Yasmin sthito na dukkhina gurunapi vichalyate. He says actually, after attaining that state, no misery of this material world can actually disturb that person. Because he has tasted that nectar. So that's how Krishna had described this whole process of Ashtanga Yoga. But when he talked about the verse 6.32, Acharyas pointed after Krishna had spoken this, then Arjuna put his objection here. So here Krishna had said, if you remember in 6.32, Mataji has covered it on Thursday. So Krishna says, I'm just reading here what Krishna says. I'm just reading the translation. He is a perfect yogi. So here Krishna is giving us a definition of who is the perfect yogi. He is a perfect yogi who, by comparison to his own self, sees the true equality of all beings in both their happiness and their distress. O Arjuna, if you look at the Sanskrit, Atma upameyana sarvatra samam pashyati o Arjuna, sukham va yadi va dukkham sa yogi paramo mataha. Such a yogi who can, by comparing to his own self, he sees the similarity with everyone else, all living entities. That person is the real yogi. That is my opinion. Now, first of all, you have to understand this is not a Mayavadi kind of sameness, because there is a difference. Samam means similarity, and Krishna is not saying ekam. He is not saying that everyone is one. He's saying they are similar. They have the same spiritual nature. So sukham va yadi va dukkham. In their happiness and distress. Everyone goes through different kinds of happiness, different kinds of distress. And everybody has the same spiritual nature. Once a person is able to see this, that person is a true mystique. Not and Krishna says that is my opinion. So when Arjuna hears this, this is the perfection. He thinks, Acharya explained that actually, how can I see everyone equally. How can I see a Duryodhana and Yudhishthir equally? I cannot, and it's very difficult for me. Arjuna is at a position in a situation where he has to fight a war, and this war is clearly with the Kurus, the Kauravas, and they are kind of opponents. And Yudhishthir is such a virtuous person. How could he actually, that's how Acharya explained. So at that time, when he thinks like that, at that time he puts his objection. He says that actually, Krishna, this process of yoga that you have summarized, this is impractical and unendurable to me. And then he further states, for the mind is restless and unsteady, chanchalatvat. So this is the same word chanchal that Krishna had used earlier to describe the nature of the mind. Chanchal is the word in one of the verses Krishna has used in the 6th chapter itself. I don't remember exactly which verse it is. So Prabhupada gives a fantastic purport to this. He is heavy in a sense that this Bhagavad Gita is spoken. Prabhupada in summary he writes that actually this Bhagavad Gita was spoken 5,000 years ago, and Arjuna, from no means Arjuna is an ordinary person. Arjuna is actually very qualified in a way. He is born in a very royal family. He has so many different qualities. He is the best of the warriors, and moreover, Prabhupada says that he is the best friend of Krishna. So these are all these qualities that Arjuna has, and here Arjuna is rejecting this process, and this was 5,000 years ago. Prabhupada points out. So how much more is this true in this age? So Prabhupada says that in this age, this whole process is useless. There's no use doing this, because actually what happens is today, all these yoga studios, they don't actually teach most of the yoga. So I wouldn't say all, because there are, at least I've heard that there are certain places, at least in India, I've heard, they try to, at least they endeavor to teach the true eightfold yoga system, Ashtanga yoga as we call it. So what happens in the Western countries most of the times is they just teach the twofold yoga, asana and pranayam. They don't talk about anything else. Yam, niyam. First of all, if they just talk about yama and niyama, do's and don'ts, then nobody is going to come to their yoga studio. If they tell that you are not supposed to do this, and you are supposed to do this, these are the yams and niyams, do's and don'ts of yoga, then that's it. Next day, nobody is going to come to the yoga studio. So what they do is they just talk about the asanas and the pranayam. So pranayam is generally used to control the mind in a sense. We know that breathing exercises, breathing is connected with the mind. When we are too much agitated, angry, so even doctors have said if you feel, agitated, just take deep breaths like that. So what happens is the breathing is understood, it's scientifically understood that deep breathe. So breathing is related to or connected with the mind. So to soothe the mind, we can take deep breaths. So there are different kinds of breathing exercises. That is what pranayam is. And asanas, they are basically meant to keep the body healthy. The yogis, they are living in a secluded place, and there is no one around to take care of them, in a sense. I mean, there are sometimes it may happen that some yogis may actually perform yoga. The true yogis I'm talking about, in a group of 2 or 3 or 4, maybe not more than that. But generally, in most cases, they are alone. So if they are not healthy, and if they're not able to take care of their body, then they won't be able to sustain for very long. So these different bodily postures, they kind of regulate the pranavayu in the body. Not just the pranavayu, but all the different vayus that are there, but mostly the pranavayu. And pranavayu actually gives them the strength to fight different, basically it keeps the body healthy and gives the body the strength to fight different diseases, infections, etc. So in that sense, today's yoga system, people are generally after the externals. I want to look good, I want to look healthy, and that's the whole idea. And that's why what is being taught today is just a 2-4 yoga system, not the 8-4 yoga system. So Prabhupada also says that, I just read this, what Prabhupada says: those who are imitating this yoga system in different so-called schools and societies, although complacent, are certainly wasting their time. they are completely in ignorance of the desired goal. So they have no idea what is the desired goal of yoga. So all these other things are actually the byproducts of following the yoga process. But what the people are doing today is, they have completely left the main goal of yoga, and then they're just running after the byproducts of the yoga. So there is also this movement going on where they're trying to disconnect yoga with Hinduism, because a lot of schools, a lot of colleges, they don't allow yoga to be taught in the schools, because we know in US a lot of parents, they don't want any kind of religious things to be taught in the schools to their children. If it especially not anything that is not Christian. So there are many schools which they don't allow. So their idea is that if we disconnect yoga with Hinduism or anything to do with the Vedas, then the acceptance would be much more. So all this is like driven by business. In business sense, yoga is a very big industry now in America. It's the revenues that are associated with yoga, not just the different yoga schools. There are also that all the other paraphernalia. We have the yogi dress. Now they have this, what is it called? The yoga pants, and for women, and so many different accessories which are there. So this yoga business is a very big business, at least in America. I was reading somewhere that 1 out of 6 American, they are following some or the other kind of yoga. And once they start following, they also start investing in these different kinds of, paraphernalia, different accessories that are connected to yoga. So they were trying to basically, grow their business. So they want to completely disconnect it with anything to do with God and religion. So they're just running after something which is just like a byproduct. It's not even the goal, and that's what Prabhupada is also pointing out here. Now coming back to this verse, Arjuna says that this process is impractical. So why is it impractical? That Arjuna is going to describe in the next. Why he thinks that this process is impractical, that he will describe in the next verse. But before we move on to the next verse, are there any questions or comments or corrections? Okay. There are no questions, no comments, no corrections. Let me move on to the next verse. This is 6.34.
Prabhuji, I have one question.
Yes, Madhuri, please go ahead.
So nowadays, I'm like in Bhagavatam, when Dhritarashtra, want to leave the body, he also goes into he does the yoga, and then he leaves his breath, and then he but being us like a normal people, is it by doing just bhakti, but just by following the bhakti path, do you think we can reach God? Because they are being such a great personalities, having so many I don't know what is the right word to use. So many, these things, still they did the yoga, and then they went into the bhakti, and then they went into that, to leave the body, right? Like they performed all the things, and then they left the body. So being a normal people, do we think just by following the bhakti, we will be able to focus on lotus feet of God and then reach Bhagwan,
So I understood your question, Mataji. Let me ask you a question. Why
Yes.
do you think that by doing bhakti we cannot reach God? Or
No,
just
I'm not. No, I'm not saying we cannot reach God. What I'm saying is we are normal, this thing, right? Because how our mind is always fluctuated here and there. Even when we are doing the bhakti, like when we are chanting also, half of the time our mind will take, some thoughts are coming. We are pushing, and again we are going towards this. But that, do you think it's going to
Sunita,
more?
Sunita, are you trying to say that those people are doing so much austerities and doing bhakti, and in our bhakti we are kind of fluctuating? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, Mataji. What I'm
No?
trying to say is, when they also did yoga and then they are trying to focus more, right? Being normal people, do we think like we will be able to reach without
So,
doing any of these?
okay,
like,
I understood your question. So you are talking about Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra, it is understood that he is not a bhakta because, if you look at the context itself, Bhagavad Gita, we say that Bhagavad Gita is very powerful if you just hear it very cautiously and very submissively accepting Krishna as God, then that's enough for you. That's how sometimes we put it. But we see that originally when Krishna is speaking the Bhagavad Gita, three people heard the Bhagavad Gita. One is Arjuna, one is Sanjay, and through Sanjay it is Dhritarashtra also who is hearing the Bhagavad Gita. Now we see that Bhagavad Gita has a very profound effect on Arjuna. Arjuna actually says that, Karishye Vachanam, whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it, my dear Lord. So he accepts, he surrenders to Krishna. And then we see that even Sanjay, when he speaks the concluding verses, you can look at the verses, we understand that even Sanjay has transformed in a sense. He is already a bhakta, but after hearing Bhagavad Gita, after seeing the Virat Rupa of Krishna, he is more and more surrendered to Krishna. But at that time, there is no indication that Dhritarashtra, there is any effect at all on Dhritarashtra. He is just, morose in a way, or if you look at Mahabharata also, there is no effect on Dhritarashtra. So Dhritarashtra is not a bhakta. And if a person is not a bhakta, then he needs a different path to follow. So we can leave Dhritarashtra case aside. There are different other cases that are mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. If you look at the case of Bhaktaraj Prahlad, we say he's like the king of the devotees. There is no indication in Srimad Bhagavatam that Prahlad has followed any other process besides bhakti. He himself actually describes that how to do bhakti, how to actually transcend. He says 9 processes he describes. What is it? Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam. Like that, he describes the 9 processes of bhakti. And if you look at the Bhagavad Gita itself, after speaking the whole Bhagavad Gita, we may say that yes, Krishna talks about Jnana Yoga, yes, Krishna talks about Karma Yoga, yes, Krishna talks about Ashtanga Yoga, and then he also talks about Bhakti Yoga. But after talking everything in the Bhagavad Gita, when he concludes the Gita in the 18th chapter, which is the conclusion of the Gita, he speaks very clearly. There is no doubt in Krishna's words over there, 18.64 to 18.66. Sarva guhyatamam bhuyah shrunu me paramam vacha ishto sima dridamiti tato vakshami tehitam. This is 18.64. Sarva guhyatamam bhuya. Bhuya means again. Krishna had used this word bhuya in the 10th chapter. So bhuya eva mahabaho shrunu me paramam vacha. He had put this like this, this is my supreme instruction. He has said that in the 10th chapter also. And there also he had talked about bhakti only. And here again he is saying this is sarva guhyatam, this is the most confidential. And I'm telling this to you again. Shrunu me paramam vachaha, this is my supreme instruction. And why am I speaking this to you? Ishto si me dridamiti. You are very dear to me. I'm determined to love. Dridam means I'm determined to love you. Ishto si me. Tato vakshami te hitam, and I am speaking this to you for your benefit, Arjuna. And then he says, Man mana bhav mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Mam avashyasi satyam te pratijane priyosi me. He says that you become my devotee, offer obeisances to me. And if you do like this, I am guaranteeing this to you, that you will come back to me. And then he says, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam raja aham tvam sarva papebhyo moksheshyami ma shucha. If you have any doubt about it, just surrender to me, and I'll free you from all sinful reactions. Because Arjuna had this doubt in his mind, what about the sinful reactions? So he said, don't worry about that. If you become my devotee, if you surrender to me through bhakti, so we can say that, okay, there could be different ways in which we can surrender to Krishna, but Krishna is making it very clear that you surrender to me and you surrender through the process of bhakti yoga. And if you surrender to me in this way, don't worry, I'm going to take care of all your sins. And this is 18th. There's many places actually. This is the conclusion, of course, where Krishna he's not leaving any doubt about it. That he's not saying become my jnani. He's not saying become my ashtanga yogi. He's saying become my bhakta. The word is very clear. Man mana bhav mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Then again, if you see, when he compares when Arjuna himself asks. What is that question that Arjuna asked in the 12th chapter? He asked a question, trying to remember that. Okay, he says evam satata yuktaye bhakta swam pariyupasate ye chapya aksharam avyaktam tesham ke yoga vittama. He says, who is more, who is more intimately united with you in yoga. He is basically comparing between the Gyanis, and he is comparing between the Bhakti Yogis. At that time also Krishna had clearly said that, what is Krishna? He says, Maya avesha manoyamam nitya yukta upasate shraddhaya pariyopeta steme yukta tamomataha. He says people who are worshipping my personal form, they are more, this is my opinion, that they are more intimately associated with me in yoga. So that is also, and then he actually compares, he doesn't leave it at that. He says, ye to aksharam adarteshyam avyaktam paryupasate sarvatra gamachintyam cha kutastam achalam dhruvam sanyamendriya gramam sarvatra samabuddhaya te prapnuvanti mameva sarvabhuta hiterata. He says, actually, even the Gyanis will attain me, but they will take a lot of time, And then he says, what are the problems with in the Jnana Yoga? He says, klesho adhiktarastesham avyakta asakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukkham devadbhiraviti. He says two negatives. He says their path is full with klesha and dukkha. Klesha, basically miseries. This path is very difficult. It is full of miseries. So don't go that path. Kind of, he is putting that. And then he shuts it out there, and then he focuses on Bhakti Yoga after that. So very clearly he says, yetu sarvani karmani mai sanyas matparha ananya naiva yogena mam dhyayanta upasate tesham aham samuddharta mrityu samsara sagarat bhavami na chirat partha mai aveshita chetsam. He says that actually for the Bhakti Yogis who have renounced all their activities in me, yetu sarvani karmani mai sanyas matparaha ananya naiva yogena mam dhyayanta upasate. With ananya yoga, who worship me, what do I do with them? Tesham aham samuddharta. I personally come and lift them up. I take them out of the mrityu samsara sagarat. I take them out of this ocean of birth and death. And then he says, bhavami na chirat partha, without any delay. If you remember when he was talking about the Jnana Yogis, he says after a very long time they will attain me. But here he is saying na chirat partha, without any delay. Therefore, mai aveshita chesam, invest your consciousness in me, in my personal form as a bhakta. And then from there, he starts describing the qualities of the bhakta. He speaks, he gives the hierarchy of how to follow bhakti, and then he describes the qualities of the bhakti. So even if you look at the tone of the Gita, if you look at the conclusion of the Gita, there also Krishna is saying that Ananya Bhakti. Ananya means without any mixture with any other paths. Ananya may have two meanings. It may mean unbreakable. You should not have any breaks. Okay, I do it today and then I take a break of 5 days and then I do it again. And then Ananya also means unalloyed. Unalloyed means it's not mixed with anything else, Jnana and Ashtanga and all those things. Now, having said that, there are cases where people might do that, and Krishna does talk about Yoga Mishra Bhakti in the 8th chapter. He also talks about Jnana Mishra Bhakti in the 5th chapter. So those in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya we have Chakravarti Pad, who has written a book. I have that book, missing the name of that book. He analyzes that in that. But the tone of the Gita, the ultimate conclusion of the Gita is very clear that what Krishna desires is Ananya Bhakti. He doesn't desire anything mixed. And if we look at, Prabhupada also points out in the purport. So Arjuna is known to be a devotee of Krishna. Dhritarashtra is not known to be a devotee. And Prabhupada points out in the purport that there is no indication anywhere in the Mahabharata or any other literature, any other scripture, that at any point of time Arjuna had followed anything else besides Bhakti Yoga. And even the topmost devotees we consider the gopis. The gopis are considered to be cowherd women. They are not very intelligent from a material sense. Of course, from a spiritual sense, they are supremely intelligent. But there is no indication that, and they are not even capable or doing any kind of Ashtanga Yoga or Dhyana Yoga. But still, they are considered to be the highest of the devotees. So there are different cases like this. You can analyze that. So you are taking a case of Dhritarashtra, and nowhere even in the Mahabharata, when Krishna shows his Virat Rupa, when Krishna goes as a Shanti Dut, and Krishna shows his Virat Rupa over there also. But there also, after seeing that, and then at that time when there is a lot of commotion that is happening in the assembly, and of course Dhritarashtra is blind. He can't see. He asks Sanjay, what is happening over there? So Sanjay says that actually Krishna is showing his Virat Rupa. So he prays to Krishna at that time that I want to see your Virat. Please let me see your Virat. And then Krishna grants him the vision. And then at that time, Dhritarashtra is seeing the Virat Rupa. And even after seeing that, he doesn't change. So by no means Dhritarashtra is a devotee. Nowhere it is indicated in the Mahabharata. And in fact, it is indicated elsewhere that they had a little grudge also on Krishna, that they thought that Krishna could have stopped the war, but he did not. And we know that Gandhari later she curses Krishna also. But in fact, Krishna did try to stop the war. He himself came as the Shantaduta, but his proposal was rejected by Duryodhana. So I don't know if I answered your question. I don't want to take it too far, but does it answer your question, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhuji, it's more clarified. Like I didn't finish the whole Bhagavad Gita. I'm just listening with the flow like this every day. So I didn't reach even the 12th chapter, the 10th chapter. But it clarified, Prabhuji. It's much clear now. No doubt about it. Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Okay, no worries, Mataji. Thank you. Any other questions? Anyone like to add anything to that?
Isn't it said somewhere, Ganpati Govind, that this process, if sincerely performed, even if somewhat imperfectly performed, reaps results? Or not true?
Maybe it is, Mataji. I'm not able to remember. In the 9th chapter, a lot of things Krishna says. He talks about people who have accidental slips and fall downs on the path of bhakti. And then he's even Mahatma, even still they'll have to be considered as Mahatmas. I'm trying to remember that verse. But I don't.
Picheta Sudachara.
Yeah, Picheta Sudachara. Bhatte Mamanandabha. Sadhureva Samantavya. Samyak Vyavasito Hisa. They have to be considered sadhu. But I don't remember any such verse where he said that if it is imperfectly followed. So we see that there are different levels of bhakti that Krishna talks about in the 12th chapter. Mai eva manadasva, mai buddhim niveshya, nivasishyasi mai eva, aturdham na samshaya. Your mind and intelligence should always be fixed upon me. But if you cannot do like this, he says, next verse he speaks, atachittam samadhatum na shaknoshi maistrim abhyasa yogena tato mam ichhaptum dhananjaya. He says, do abhyasa, do practice. And by practice, try to attain a desire, try to have a desire to attain me. And then if you're not able to do that also, abhyasapya samarthosi mat karma parmo bhava madartham api karmani kurvan siddhima vapsisi. He says mat karma parmo bhava, do my work and consider my work to be the supreme. And if you do like this, then you will. So basically he gives different levels. And then the lowest level he speaks is about doing some charity work. If you can't do this, do this, do this, do this. And I think 5th level he talks about doing some mundane charity. Through that, if you are selfless in that way, slowly you can attain me, and you can make progress. If not in this lifetime, further lifetimes, like that he puts it. But I don't remember any such verse where he says that. If imperfectly follow, but these are different levels that he gives, and then he says that even if you are at somewhere you can fit yourself in one of these levels, then you can gradually make progress, like that he puts it.
Is she thinking of Nehabi Kramo Nasusti, even a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear? Is that what you're thinking of, Gitamala?
No, I thought something imperfectly, I thought I heard somewhere, imperfect, even if somewhat imperfectly performed. I thought I heard somewhere. I can't remember where.
Listening to the Gita, somewhere in there, what you just referenced.
And also, just an example that Srila Prabhupada himself was preaching to people just by the power of the holy name. He didn't give them yama and niyama in the beginning. You know what I'm saying? They were, drug addicts. They were into illicit sex. They were into everything. Yes, they were somewhat vegetarian, many of them, but, it's, of course, influence of the pure devotees there. And his perfect example, disarmed them. But, he simply gave them the holy name in the beginning and just asked them to chant, and transform them little by little. And then later on, they wanted to follow the yama and niyamas, you know.
That's very true, Mataji. Yeah, first some purification is necessary, you know, and that purification happened with Harinam. He just asked him
Exactly.
to chant.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that purification happened. Harinam did its work. Then he asked, okay, now you do this and don't do this. So also there is this verse in the 11th chapter which Prabhupada points out that this is the essence of the Gita. Is what is that? Mat karma krin mat parmo mat bhakta sanga varjita nirvaire sarva bhuteshu yah samameti pandava. So mat karma krin mat parmo mat bhakta sanga varjita. So work for me, consider me to be the supreme goal, and become my devotee mat bhakta, and give up false worldly association, sangha varjita, nirvaire sarva bhuteshu. You know, in this way, if you are unenvious of all living entities, yaha samamiti pandava, you surely come back to me. So like this, there are different verses where Krishna glorifies bhakti. Even in the 6th chapter towards the end, the last verse, he will glorify bhakti yoga. In the last verse of the 6th, which is 6th chapter is the chapter of Ashtanga Yoga, but he glorifies bhakti yoga in the end. I think Kwaku Prabhu wants to say something. Please go ahead.
Yes. So I mean, I was driving earlier on listening to you, and I just have a little confused because, you know, I'm new to this. So part of me, I have a lot of questions and I'm still exploring. I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos. I've encountered some, you know, personalities by, you know, I'll give you an example. I think one is Sadhguru and another one is Guru Dev. I've been listening to them because, you know, I'm trying to learn as much as I can. And they, like somebody like Sadhguru, I think that he's a big proponent of the eightfold, 8-part yoga system, and meditation and all that. And I personally believe that you can, if you practice and practice, you can do it. You just have to be committed to doing it. You have to be able to, you know, sit down 2 hours straight and try to practice every day. If you can do that twice a day, that'll be good. But it's a lot to do for somebody who has work to do and go to and come. I know it's difficult, but I believe if you practice and you practice, you will get there at a point in time. I'm just trying to, you know, get your take on, you know, what these gurus are saying and all that. If you have any, you know, experience with watching them and what they teach.
Yeah, actually, I don't follow these gurus so much, Prabhuji. I mean, I've heard their names definitely, but I haven't heard them or didn't read their philosophy as such. But I can tell you one thing based on what is mentioned in the Gita. You know, I am not denying the fact that, you know, we, as you said, you know, you can practice and practice and, you know, you can become perfect like that. Even Krishna will say that later, Arjuna, when he puts this objection, Krishna says that abhyas and vairagya. Abhyas is practice and vairagya is detachment. You know, by this you can do it. That's how Krishna will reply to Arjuna. But let me ask you a question. Suppose, I don't know where you are. Maybe say, for example, you're in Hartford and you have to go to Texas, right? Now, there are 3 ways you can go. Either you can take a flight to Texas, you can drive to Texas, or you can walk to Texas. So how would you prefer to go?
It depends on what kind of experience I want to have.
Yeah.
Now, so I might drive there over flight because I want to see the countryside.
Right. So
get to know it.
Exactly. So there has to be, you have a purpose of driving, but if someone wants to get there faster, obviously the answer is that I will take, with no hassle, no, I just want to get there. I don't have any other objective. So that person will take a flight because he can be there in 2 hours. If you drive, it will take 16 hours and you will have to take so many stops and it will cost you much more gas and tolls and so much more. And of
Mhm.
course, walking there is out of picture. You know,
You might not
it's-
even get there if you meet
Exactly.
some armed robbers
Hitchhiking.
on the way.
I mean, I've heard Radhanath Maharaj has hitchhiked from USA to India, but it's not for everyone.
Right.
So that is about Bhakti Yoga. So when Krishna is putting his own guarantee, and he is, he's saying that this is, in the 9th chapter, we have not come there yet, but he's going to glorify Bhakti Yoga there. And he says, Raj Vidya Raj Guhyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam Pratyakshavagavam Dharmyam Susukham Kartum Avyayam. This process is joyfully performed. If you compare this with Ashtanga Yoga, there's so many trouble there. Prabhupada also writes, who wants to go to a jungle right now? Do you want to go to a forest and practice Ashtanga Yoga? I don't know what the gurus are teaching, but at least Krishna is making it very, very clear that, this Ashtanga Yoga process is not to be done in a city. City is a passionate place. There are so many distractions, and you have to really focus your mind. You have to control your mind. You have to go to a secluded place, sit alone there, and you have to practice it. It's a very stringent thing, which is not for everyone. So if you are thinking of doing it here in this city, sitting at your home, all the best. I'm sure it will. I mean, you might get perfect, but it may take many lifetimes actually. So if the goal is to attain Krishna, why not take the easier path, the safer path, the faster path? Why you have to take a path which is not safe? It's very slow and it's very difficult. This is just my take on it. Because you asked for my take, and this is
Right.
based on what Krishna himself says in the Gita 9.2, as I says, Susukham Kartum Ave. It is joyfully performed. Prabhupada said, eat, drink, and dance. Sorry, not eat, drink, and dance. He said, sing, eat, and dance, if I'm not wrong, and go back to Godhead. So what a joyful process,
Right, brother. So what just one, and I appreciate that. That definitely put it in perspective. One question, somewhere in the Gita though, what else I'm still, does Krishna not say that the one who is combining all the 4 paths of yoga, meaning bhakti, karma, raja yoga, and the last one, there's the one who's combining the 4, he is the one that's really seated in, something, is the elevated one or something like amongst all the yogas. Doesn't he say something like that?
At least I have not come across any such verse, Prabhuji. But if you can tell me more about that verse, I can probably try to see if you are.
I will listen again and I'll call, we'll talk about it. You know what I mean? And then we'll go
Yeah.
further, maybe over the phone.
We have this, we have this Yoginam api sarvesham madgate nantaratmana shrattavan bhajate yomam samayukta tamomata. He says, a yogi who is always thinking about me, he is the best of the yogi. But it doesn't talk about, maybe, I don't know if you're talking about that verse, that is 6.47, Yoginam api sarvesham. But other than that, I don't remember seeing that a yogi which combines the 4 paths, he is the best. It's not to my understanding.
So brother, another question. So we have these 4 paths, bhakti, karma, raja, and what's the last one? How do you pronounce the last one?
Ashtanga Yoga or Dhyan Yoga.
Jnana yoga.
Yeah, Dhyan Yoga. That is the 6th.
Jnana yoga. So I know that Krishna in the Gita is teaching us that bhakti will get you there, right? But what is his take on, well, can karma yoga take you there? Can raja yoga take you there? Because we don't talk about that at all. And
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't say that it will not take you there. He doesn't say that, okay, karma yoga will not take you there. He doesn't say that jnana yoga will not take you there. He is not saying that ashtanga yoga will not take you there. But he is putting his own personal factor in the bhakti yoga path. That in this bhakti yoga path, see what happens. Understand the difference in the 4. So karma yoga basically deals with acting with detachment for the purpose of purification and attaining transcendence. You are just acting in this world, but you are trying to detach yourself. Detach yourself from the fruits of your work. That is karma yoga in one sentence. Jnana yoga is intellectually trying to understand that I am not the body, I am the soul. I am not this body. Aham brahmasmi, aham brahmasmi, aham brahmasmi. This is their mantra. Like we have Hare Krishna mantra, they have aham brahmasmi, aham brahmasmi. So I
Okay.
am not the body, I am the soul. Just try to contemplate on it. Now, what is the joy in it? But anyway, come to that. So there is a lot of, and then it's not just that. They intellectually try to understand with the analysis of different scriptures, different Upanishads, and then intellectually they have to come to the conclusion. It is like a science experiment to prove that, okay, I am not the body, I am something different from the body. And once I have realized that I am not the body, I am the soul, then they can go and merge into Brahman. That is the idea. Okay, now the third path is the Jnana Yoga, the Dhyan Yoga. Now Dhyan Yoga, it is basically, as we were discussing, it is the path of regulating the mind, controlling the mind, and ultimately subduing the mind. And then from the mind, understanding that I am not the mind, and then from by subduing the mind, going towards finding out that what is our real nature. Our real nature is spiritual, and from there going further and trying to understand Paramatma, Atma and Paramatma both. So it is also a pretty elaborate process. And what happens in Bhakti is we are trying to have, we are basically trying to kindle our emotions and trying to have a loving relationship with Krishna. So we are trying to develop our relationship with Krishna. So that is Bhakti Yoga. So we are trying to love him. We are, we are trying to understand who he is as a person. And we are trying to understand, what can I do to please this Lord? How can I understand him, and how can I have a relationship with him? So Krishna is saying that actually, if you come as a bhakta, if you come as a devotee, if you want to love me, if you want to love me as a person, if you want to have a loving reciprocation with me, then I'm saying, and doesn't that happen in our relationships also? If, say for example, a mother takes a child to a doctor, a doctor will know a lot about the child. The doctor will say that I know your body temperature, I know your blood group, I know what color is your stool, I know, what are the different things in your body, the compositions. Then the child might get surprised, oh, this person knows a lot about me. But then what about the mother? The mother knows the child as the person he is. What are his likes? What are his dislikes? So who do you think child will like more? Would he like the doctor more or the mother more?
The mother, of course.
Mother, of course. So what is happening is, so there is a personal relationship that is getting built in the Bhakti Yoga process, which is missing in the other paths. It is not, the idea is not to have a personal relationship with God in the other paths. Now, in the Karma Yoga path, it is that because this world is a place of misery, this place is a, I want to get detached from this world. I don't want to have anything to do with. So the focus is on me, on the Karma Yoga path. Same is the case with Ashtanga Yoga, Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga also, if you see in the 13th chapter, Krishna will describe the path of Jnana Yoga. He says, Dukkha, Janma Mrityu Jaravyadhi Dukkha Doshanudarshanam. A person who has understood, person who has realized the miseries involved in birth, death, old age, and disease. So again, the idea is that because these things are giving me misery, therefore I want to get detached from this. Whereas a Bhakti Yoga, he doesn't, the impetus for him is not the miseries that he's getting with being in this world. For the impetus for him is having a personal relationship with, having a personal relationship with Krishna, and the joy that the person gets by having that person. That is the impetus over there.
Okay.
So, what is easier? We can kindle our emotions to love someone, or so in the Jnana Yoga path, the idea is to suppress the emotions. You should not have any emotions at all. You have to intellectually understand that you are not the body. So body and all the emotions that are there with the body. So anyway, I'm just trying to give very very high level definitions of these. This is, or I'm trying to simplify it a lot, but it's not that simplified. There's a lot of, complexities also involved, but we have to first understand what are the different paths. What does it involve, and then what does Krishna recommend in the Bhagavad Gita?
Right. Okay. Definitely. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure, Suji.
I'd just like to add something.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I think your explanation was excellent. And that was the simplified explanation. And I'm going to try to give an even more simplified explanation because I'm not so, I don't know that much. But first of all, there's three there's three realizations of the absolute truth. The absolute truth is understood in three phases: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Vedanti Tattva, Vidas Tattvam, Yajnanam Advayam Param. Anyway, this is Sanskrit. But if you want to come to the highest platform, the only way you can get there is through bhakti. You can't get there through jnana, karma, astanga. The other platforms are like rings on a ladder. You're climbing a ladder, but the top ring is bhakti. And that's the highest realization of the absolute truth. So you can practice these other things and you can come to know the absolute truth, but not completely. The most you can understand the absolute truth is through bhakti. And that's, as he was explaining, is through love and devotion. And you can't come to that platform any other way. As he explained, it's personal. And it's interesting, emotions. We have emotions because God has emotions, and we're part and parcel of God. And these material emotions, we don't want to necessarily have these material emotions, but we can have spiritual emotions. In other words, the same emotions are transformed into spiritual emotions because they're for Krishna and everything related to Krishna. But they are emotions. And you're a person. So to be a person in the spiritual world is much higher than just being a vibration or a sound or what do they call it? Just becoming one with God, and there's nothing compared to having a personal relationship. So, and that you can only do through bhakti. There's no other way. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhuji.
Well, thank you.
You
Good.
talk about the yoga ladder, right? That ultimately the last ring of yoga is bhakti.
Yeah.
So we make gradual progress through karma, then jnana, then ashtanga yoga, and then finally we at somewhere we have to come to bhakti also. I think you're right, because even in ashtanga yoga, the last limb or the yama is Ishwar Pranidhan. Ishwar Pranidhan is surrender to Ishwar. Of course, the definition of Ishwar might be a little hazy there. In the Ashtanga Yoga path, they may not really understand who that Ishwar is, but they have to, for themselves, find out who the Ishwar is and then do Ishwar Pranidhan, which is surrender to Ishwar, God, which is surrender is a limb of bhakti, as you said. So somewhere or the other, they have to come to Bhakti Yoga.
And Ishvara is controller.
Right.
So a controller is a person.
Exactly.
It's not an energy or a force that's the controller. It's actually a person behind the energy. If there's energy, there's the energetic. That means there's a person. So when they say Ishvara, it has to be a person.
Right.
They may not know who that person is, but they'd have to know that it is a person.
Very true, Prabhuji. And Krishna also says that, of course, for the Ashtanga yogis, the destination is Paramatma. But I'm just trying to find that verse where Krishna says that there is no difference between me and Paramatma. I am that Paramatma here in the 6th chapter itself.
So while you're looking for that, so there's the Atma, then there's the Paramatma, and then what's the next level? Bhagwan. And so what are the differences between these 3 levels in just English terms?
So Paramatma is the localized aspect of the absolute truth, which is present in every single body. He is the super soul. We have the soul and the super soul. Soul is the self. We are Jiva. We are inside this body. But along with us, the super soul is also residing in the body. So that super soul is actually Paramatma, but we can't actually perceive that. We know that he is there in the body. Krishna also says, Aham Atma Gudakesha Sarva Bhuta Ashe Siddham Adistya Madhyam Sa Bhuta Namante, which I am that super soul situated in every living entity. So actually 3-4 times he says that in the Bhagavad Gita in different ways. Sarvastha Chaham Hridasannavishto, I am the super soul situated in every living entity. But actually we can't perceive that super soul because he is not manifest in front of us. So Bhagwan is the personal aspect. He is manifest as a person, not here, but in the spiritual world. And once the idea is that when Krishna says, repeatedly he says in the Gita that in this way you will come back to me, in this way you will come back to me. So what will happen when we go back to Krishna? So we will be able to associate with him, as a person. He is a person, we are a person, and we will be able to associate with him directly. So that personal aspect of the Supreme Lord, Supreme Absolute Truth, is actually Bhagavan.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And this is the verse that I was talking about. This is verse 31. Sarva bhuta sitam yomam bhajate ekatvam ashitaha sarvatha vartmanopi sayogi mai vartate. Such a yogi who engages in worshipful service of the super soul, knowing that I and the super soul are one, remains always in me in all circumstances. So Krishna makes it very clear in different ways that he is actually that super soul. So there are just different phases or different realizations or different manifestations of that one supreme absolute truth. So Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, these are the three different realizations. But Bhagavan realization is the highest. Highest in a sense, it is the most complete realization. So yeah, and that highest realization can be done through bhakti. Excuse me. Okay, I think we can stop here then. We are over the time now. Thank you everyone. Thank you for joining. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhibhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Koti Vaishnavrinti ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Ganapati Govind ki jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everyone.